Happy Tuesday, everybody. My name is Angela Damiani. I am the CEO at Milwaukee, and I am super excited for this afternoon's conversation around creating connection amid isolation and the ways in which we might build engagement in the organizations in which we work, live, play, etc. I'm going to ask that all of our guests mute themselves here, and I will remind you that you can pop in the chat, ask questions of our panelists. I have a ton of things I want to talk to our amazing guests about today, but we want to hear from all of you as well. Today we are going to talk about how friendship, connection, sense of belonging are all at an all-time low, and social isolation and loneliness are on an all-time high. Companies, membership organizations, and other communities all have been suffering due to churn from disengagement and isolation. And all of that was true before the pandemic. And as a result of the pandemic has only been increasingly more exacerbated. During this conversation, we're going to talk about encouraging connection and friendships. We're going to talk about creating psychological attachment to place, how to manage remote and hybrid work environments. But you can imagine if you're here operating from a membership organization, you've probably had to set up a Zoom event or figure out how to do virtual engagement with your members as well. And how do we foster engagement and retention across those constituencies? I'm joined here today by three amazing speakers. Cannot tell you how excited I am to get into this conversation with these experts. We have Dr. Galen Buckwalter, the CEO of, how do I say this? PsyML, and former Chief Scientific Officer at eHarmony. Did I get that right, Galen?
PsyML.
PsyML, thank you.
Psychology meets machine learning.
Yes. And Tracy Brower, who is the author of The Secrets to Happiness at Work and Bringing Work to Life, as well as my incredible business partner and very best friend, CEO of Like-Minded, Jeremy Fojut. Thank you all for being here. Let's start with an easy question. I'm going to have you each maybe introduce yourselves and your own interest in this conversation before we get into some of the more esoteric questions I have on the lineup for you today. Tracy, why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I'm Tracy Brower. I'm a PhD sociologist, and I study work life and happiness and fulfillment. And my books, as you mentioned, are out there. I'm also a contributor with Forbes.com and Fast Company, and a principal with Steelcase's Applied Research and Consulting Group. And I just think this is such a critical time for this conversation. I think our friendships, our relationships, our connections are so critical to all aspects of our health and well-being. And so that's part of my interest in this conversation today.
I'm so excited to get into more of this with you. Galen, how about you?
Hi, I'm a PhD clinical psychologist. Spent much of my career in academia doing research into the effects of various steroidal hormones on brain functioning. Transitioned through series of serendipitous events into developing the matching system for eHarmony.com. Kind of got the entrepreneurial bug after that, and have been working in startups focusing on using psychometrics at scale to make online relationships more satisfying and productive. Amazing. So yeah, that's totally think this is a timely conversation.
And how about you, Jer?
My name is Jeremy. I'm CEO of Like-Minded. It's basically a B2B software platform around the psychology and neuroscience of friendship that matches people using psychometrics or science over serendipity inside organizations at a time when we're more connected than ever, but least connected to each other, I think, than ever. It's almost a timely matter for us to take friendship more seriously.
Absolutely. Well, I have a question that I'd love to hear from each of you the answer on, and that is, what is the state of loneliness here in the United States, and why do you believe we are so lonely? Who wants to jump in first?
Well, I'll let either of you jump in. I have my own theories, but
I'll give it a shot. I think the change started with the distribution of work as our employment opportunities became more geographically distributed. That drove us to become separated from traditional institutions as basic as family, church, communities, as we needed to be mobile for our economic viability. So, much as I think work kind of led that transition, I also think work can be the central factor in bringing us back together into functional groups. But that's to be discussed later.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions about that, Galen. I'm excited to sort of debate that. Tracy, what do you think? The state of loneliness, how did we get here? Why are we so lonely?
Yeah, right. We may have been angling down this path anyway, but the pandemic has made it so much more acute. And if we look at some of the studies that are out there, like there was a Qualtrics study that showed 75% of people are experiencing loneliness. There was an Oracle study that said 78% were struggling with mental health, all kinds of mental and cognitive and emotional issues. People are saying that their performance has been impacted negatively. And I think many of the studies that I've been looking at say that our social isolation is increasing along with more working from home, kind of to some of the points that Galen was making, that there is this correlation. And I think one of the things that's happening is we've got this cognitive dissonance, right? Like, we have been apart from our people, but then when we get together, we have to be careful and we have to be concerned about how close we get, which may be super appropriate, but it just introduces cognitive dissonance. We can't come together in the ways that we normally would. And I think too, we've got this cognitive dissonance around increasing intimacy, right? Like, we invite people into our homes and into our offices and we feel up close and personal with them. And we can't quite track with them in the same ways non-verbally. We can't quite get in sync neurologically in the same ways. We don't quite feel as connected. So there's also this cognitive dissonance in terms of intimacy and distance. And those are things I think that exacerbate the sense of isolation, the sense of being apart from our people, the sense of not having the same levels of community in the same ways that we're used to as human beings in terms of that face-to-face relationship. So those are some of the things that come to mind immediately, and we can unpack all of those.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it starts with the way we designed our cities. We spend more time alone in a car than we've ever had before in the history of the United States. Everything we build is further away than we built it before. Now we're starting to see a little turn on that, but think about when you used to walk outside your house and maybe go to the grocery store, go to, whatever hardware store, restaurant, bar, you used to walk to there and bump into people and run into people. You don't do that anymore, right? You're in a car, you're driving somewhere, it could be 45 minutes, commute times have added to that. I think that's where it started. And then that, separation from people and community. I mean, we know our neighbors less than we've ever known before. That kind of thing has been an interesting turn into where now when you start breaking apart communities, you break down trust. And I think what Galen said, we trust our government institutions less than before, we trust the media less than before, we trust big corporations less than before. So all that kind of cycles into being isolated. And then I think we haven't talked about social media and the platform of being connected online to, I guess, to a community of which you feel you're not a part of sometimes because you're not there and not present. And then when you do connect online, you're not using, to me, most of your senses, right? Like and it creates loneliness and isolation. Is kind of the way I'm observing it. But yeah, there's so much into it, but I think a lot of it comes to how we've built infrastructure in the city and the world.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. All of that adds to it. You just said social media, and I think a lot of people think when they're on social media, they're with their friends, right? Jer, how important is friendship, and why do you think we take it for granted in the context of this conversation around engagement and loneliness?
I think it's looked as like a nice to have if people are friends at work, and I think there's layers of friendship, right? There's many different layers of what a friend means. And I think we think that everybody has to be absolutely the best friend in the world and share, which isn't the case. But I think it's important in companies more than ever or even organizations, because with our research, we have seen that people that form a meaningful friendship inside an organization are 72% less likely to churn in that first year or leave an organization. But we do nothing to do that besides a happy hour, right? Like a company happy hour or something where we bring people together. But what we find out from those programs and those events is people don't actually meet new people at them. Or if they do, it's a very superficial conversation. So getting back to how we actually can build something that helps people connect deeper than, I know Galen, you're out in LA, but here we talk about weather all the time and potholes. And that's the epitome of that's where we end every conversation, right? It's not deeper than that. And I think it's so important because people leave companies when they don't feel like they belong, and friends are a part of it friendship is a very important part of this. And again, there's layers of friendship, and it's important to understand that I don't mean best friends every time I talk to somebody.
And how do you think that plays, or what suggestions might you have, Tracy, from your perspective about bringing, happiness into work?
Yeah, I think Jeremy's so right on with this, that friendship is such a critical element of happiness at work. And I think one of the myths of happiness is that we're always happy. And if we're happy, if we're doing it right, that happiness will be a constant. And it absolutely ebbs and flows. And we need to give ourselves space for that ebb and that flow. And that is similar to giving ourselves space for different kinds of friendship. Like, I think one of the things that we can do negatively impacting happiness is putting too much reliance on any one person at work. Like, it's really great to have a whole lot of different colleagues who can meet our needs in different ways, those layers of friendship. And we can build friendships at work through happy hours, absolutely. But I think the other thing to be aware of is we actually build stronger bonds when we're doing tasks together than we're doing just social. And just social is great. It's awesome. Go with your bad self. Keep doing those, happy hours, Zoom or otherwise. But when we can roll up our sleeves together, when we can do hard work together, when we can solve problems together, when we can take on tasks that make us sweat, either literally or figuratively, that is raw material for happiness. And when we're doing that in a community of people, that's a big deal too. I think the other thing we can do to foster friendship and foster that happiness is to reinforce our common purposes and common goals. Like, we want to work together with people on something that we share, on building our community, on contributing uniquely for each of us to that common community, to that common goal. So there are a couple of things that I think really contribute both to friendship and to happiness in that work context.
And I think someone in the chat said we don't know our neighbors, but we know people from around the world, which is definitely true. And those relationships are powerful, and online communities can be very powerful. But all the research and data still shows that most friends are within 7 miles apart from each other. and strong relationships need repetitiveness. And so, yes, getting online is important, but there's so much more to it than just talking to someone online. Even though we need online communities to be a source of where people can find happiness, and they do, and find friendship. But a majority, but all our data, majority of people are within 7 years of age and 7 miles from each other, that are strong, like closest friends. So it's still one of those. I don't think online communities have solved the problem yet, obviously.
Well, it's interesting because we're having to navigate all this, not only in our social lives through our, personal social networks, but now for many of us, we're in a remote working environment as well. Galen, I know you've done a lot of work on remote work and engagement. I think it's interesting when we talk about sort of the tension of treating everyone the same in a remote environment, but is there something we can do to identify who might thrive in a remote work and who might struggle?
Very much so. And I think, well, like Tracy identified kind of the ultimate of being in groups, which is, creativity and, this resilience that develops from being a part of the group. I think there are kind of predictable steps along the way that are going to help us get to more functional groups. And first, Angela, you mentioned the individual and that we bring our differences to the table. We've spent a lot of time, and beginning with eHarmony, looking at personality and what are the traits that we all bring to the table. Evolution has kind of imbued us with different traits like introversion, extroversion, agreeableness, contrariness. All of these exist to some level within us. And I think a self-awareness of who we are is square number one for all of us in all relationships. And the beauty of understanding ourselves is that it also makes us more aware of differences and more accepting of differences. That leads us to empathy. So, where we can have the emotional intelligence to understand that we're not all the same, and that's a good thing. We need differences to thrive in groups, or else it's the proverbial echo chamber. So moving from awareness to empathy, then we get to a point where we really can start thinking about creativity, thinking about group functioning, and where do all the different pieces fit in. So I think there are very usable kind of logical steps we can all take to help our groups achieve greater awareness, greater acceptance, and ultimately get to creativity.
Galen, do you think, I think people always misconstrue, if you're an extrovert, you would be great. You'd really suffer at remote work. You've really suffered through this. And this is not the case for every extrovert out there. And I think those different levels of traits can identify that.
Yeah, I mean, how these traits are expressed depend on stress levels and tons of different contextual factors. But you know, a lot of extroverts are great with having, you know, Zoom calls all day. There's a lot of engagement that can be had, you know, on a digital format.
I'm going to plug in your thing I use for everybody that talks to me about remote work in the chat. But it gives like a red, yellow, green light on your index on whether you'd be good at remote work. You know, yeah, like someone that's extroverted and spent my life building communities and connecting people. I have actually thrived in this environment because I'm good at building community outside of my workplace, and not everybody does that, but I'm also distracted when I'm talking with a lot of people in the office very easily. So this has been the best of both worlds because I can go create my community where I want to be a part of something, and also then not be distracted all day by the littlest things that you spend 10 minutes talking to somebody else about whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree, Jared. I've had a similar
One other thing
experience.
I might jump in on that, I think another aspect of social science and relationships has everything to do with time, with investment, with familiarity. Like as we think about different personalities, there are so many different ways that we manifest extroversion or manifest introversion. And one of the things we know is the more time we spend together, the more likely we are to be more accepting, and to Galen's point, able to demonstrate empathy. Like when you just have more data about somebody, like you see them more regularly, either, you know, on video or in person, you just kind of start to get them. You kind of start to get their moods or get their context or get the things that they're going through. And that tends to result in greater acceptance. So I think that's another ingredient, is like, as we're thinking about our own self-awareness, as we're thinking about demonstrating empathy, as we're thinking about building those relationships, part of it is familiarity, is investing time in getting to know people, is really kind of not only putting ourselves out there, but also really listening to what other people are saying so we can build that trust and build that familiarity. And I think that's something that we can't underestimate in terms of either our face-to-face or our online kind of video relationships.
Well, and to be totally frank, you know, being an employer myself, having staff, there is a sense of urgency when you think about like onboarding. Like, I just need you to have the context you need to have to do your jobs. I don't want to also have to think about everything you're describing, which takes time. It's really hard. We've always say that trust is shared experience over time, and it's very hard to accelerate that, whether it's remote or not, right? You just need the space together to get that familiarity. We're using all these words sort of similarly. Tracy, I want to sort of unpack this a little bit more from a research focus, without giving away all the secrets from your book, because we want obviously people to go out and buy it. What are some of the ways that happiness connects with friendship and community? And maybe you could even start with like kind of defining each of those, because I think we're sort of saying that it's all one, one single entity.
Yeah, and I think there are probably multiple ways for us to define it, but like happiness is this overall sense of joy and contentment, even though we may have ebbs and flows in that, right? Like a feeling that that I matter, a feeling that I have a general sense of positivity. Those are things that tend to be characteristics of happiness. As we think about community, communities are those ongoing groups where we have a common set of purpose. We have emerging leadership over time that shifts over time. We have a sense of belonging within community. We have a common sense of goals and purposes, and we feel levels of trust within community. So those are some of the descriptors of community. And friendship, I think you all can weigh in on this as well, how you define friendship, but that is those relationships between two people where we have some common valuing of each other. We have some common experience together. We've built up those relationships. And I think from a research standpoint, one of the things that we absolutely know is that when we are in productive relationships as humans with each other, we tend to release oxytocin, which is our feel-good chemical. In addition, oxytocin tends to tamp down chemicals like cortisol and adrenocorticotropin, which in short bursts are really helpful if we're running away from the saber-toothed tiger, but in longer chronic situations can be really detrimental. So oxytocin is good because it helps us feel happier and because it tamps down some of those more deleterious chemicals over time. So scientifically, when we're face to face and when we have those relationships, that is good for our brain chemistry. We also know that when people are in human relationships that are meaningful to them, they tend to have reduced morbidity, reduced mortality. They tend to have longer lifespans going along with that. They tend to have less incidence of cardiovascular disease, and on and on. In addition, when people are happy and feeling like they're making a contribution to their community, they tend to have better performance. They tend to have better physical health. They tend to set bigger goals. They tend to be more interested in learning. They tend to be more likable. And so there are lots of sort of scientifically based elements of evidence that point to how happiness and strong relationships are good for us individually and collectively, and actually for business as well. So I don't know if that starts to get at your question, Angela.
Absolutely. And I'd just like to get a little bit more, maybe you could give us some tangible examples. All of this feels like, yes, that logically makes sense, even at a high level of breaking down the science. But, as a membership director or as an organizational leader, how do you create the forum for that to happen? And also like hit all your other KPIs you have to have as a business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things we have to think about is that creating engagement and fostering relationships shouldn't be an additional thing that we have to add to our to-do list. It should be the way that we get work. So we can set up mentoring relationships versus just leaving those to chance. We can set up buddy systems with people. We can help people network across the organization by giving them the names of people that they should meet with and suggestions for what they might learn from those people. I think a very big thing that we can do as leaders is to have people collaborate on tasks, especially across organizational or team boundaries. That inter-team relationship is really helpful. I think we can absolutely make sure that people feel a lot of choice and have variety in their physical settings so that they can run into different people over time. And when we're working on different tasks in different places, that tends to foster some of the serendipitous relationships that might occur. And all of that is happening in the course of our work. And all of that can happen either virtually or in person. But to me, those are some of the tangible, kind of pragmatic ways that we can start to think about it. There's long lists, but those are some starting points.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that we can also think about on the individual level in terms of how we relate that have, again, shown to have all these positive effects on the brain. Simple things like gratitude, just taking the time to be grateful for the people that we're with. Express that gratitude. That may sound odd in the workplace, but as a way of relating, the brain just eats that up. The brain flourishes with gratitude, with compassion. Going out of your way to be nice, to take care of needs, being in relationships where we can be vulnerable, where we can express our weaknesses. These are things that are increasingly shown to have extremely positive reorganizing effects on the brain. And so what are the implications for the workplace? I think, there's some really fundamental changes that things like gratitude and compassion would bring to the workplace. And it's certainly something that we should start thinking about more systematically. And what are the implications for that?
Yeah, and I think even the term gratitude feels a little like maybe hippy dippy, but I think about what we've implemented working remotely because we don't have a sight line on one another. I can't walk into a room and just feel the energy, you know what I mean? Of like, oh, my counterpart there is clearly having a bad day. You know what I mean? You just like get that vibe. And so one of the things we've done on Mondays, we have like a kind of a roll call status meeting with everybody. And we ask two questions very consistently. The first question is, where are you at energetically on 1 to 5? And there's no judgment. You can be, a 1 or 2. I just want to be able to see, like, across the board, how is everyone doing? And also, like, if there's some consistently, like if one gentleman has been, a 1 or a 2 for a couple of weeks, like there's probably something else going on that I need to, as a manager, check in on, make sure he has the support for, et cetera. But I think having everybody share their number, we use the chat in Zoom, also has a little bit of compassion and empathy setting too. You can instantly see like, oh, wow, everybody's sort of like really feeling the effects of the news around the Delta variant. Like, we sort of become a team, even in just knowing where everybody's mental health is. And the other thing that we've done to sort of tangibly practice gratitude is very explicitly try to share what was a win for the last week. It's so easy to be like marching ahead, especially at the production level that Milwaukee's at. I mean, every week we have, it could be up to a half a dozen different events that we're producing. So it's very easy to just be like, let's jump into what needs to happen next, but to have a very quick moment. I'm not talking about like even, a half hour, but just round robin. Does anybody have any wins for this week to really help like ground us in the fact that we are achieving things, even if it feels like this merciless onslaught of stuff that's before us? That can be really, really helpful to sort of elevate and celebrate in real time. You know what I mean? So you're not just looking at the like annual strategy, oh, wow, we like achieved all our goals, but in the moment, where does it feel like we're picking up steam or, having some success? I want to switch a little bit into talking about community. And what are some of the things that people might be able to do, even in the example I just gave, to increase engagement right now or to build a community within a workplace?
Yeah, I mean, Tracy, if she doesn't say it, I'll say it for her. She told me something really interesting one time, but I'll let her talk about that. But one of the things I find is because of the isolation, obviously people are trying to solve this problem. What I'm seeing in companies across the country is you're seeing the rise of community managers, but the community managers internal, right? It's like we've taken the nonprofit theory of community manager and put it in a for-profit entity. I'm seeing chief community officers. Like, how do we build an internal community? I think that's a direct correlation to what's happening across the country, or people feeling disconnected. The huge business case too. Like, how many we just started working with a client that lost 6 employees in the last 90 days because they didn't find a friend at work, and they all started in 90 days, right? That's crazy to me that you're like, people are jumping ship because they're not finding friends. And so I think, the community and how we build that is going to be, community is very difficult, right? Like, I think everybody thinks it's like, oh, we can just put a community manager title and they build community. It's a lot of what Galen said. It's a lot of listening. It doesn't have an instant ROI, right? Like, so it's very hard, I think, for companies to figure out like what's it's very long term. And if a company is not doing it, that's probably one thing that they need to start doing, is thinking about how they're going to build community. And to me, community is about connection of people at the start, right? Like, how do we connect people to people? And because community, and sorry to keep going on this, but I think we often associate community with, or make the mistake that thinks that community is an audience, right? So hey, I run this organization, I have a big community, and it's just one-way communication. And it's like, here's an email, you're in my community. That's not community. Community is, I think the best example or how you measure it that I've heard is monthly reoccurring relationships. How many people are meeting outside of your control and meeting organically to connect on things that they need to achieve, whether that's personally or professionally? And how do you create more monthly reoccurring connections? And I don't think you do that by having an audience, is how typically we think about it. Like, we have a network, we have an audience, but that's not community. And community is deeper than that. So I think it's going to be the next big thing in companies, and it's already happening. And if a company's not doing it, you're probably behind.
Yeah, and I think too that like what we know from the research is that belonging doesn't come from just being with people. True belonging is a shared sense of social identity. So I think we can be really clear about like, what are our common goals and how are we contributing to it? And, being really clear about the work that you need me to do and the deliverables you need me to accomplish for that bigger picture. The other thing that I think is really relevant is the idea of generosity. Like, we know that generosity is correlated with happiness. Generosity is correlated with better relationships. And so when in organizations, when we can offer to help a colleague, when we can watch for a colleague who might be struggling, when there are systems within organizations where we can offer our time either externally in a team or even internally, like I've seen some great systems that organizations are coming up with where people are able to offer to contribute to a different project or contribute to a different team. They get learning and development and relationship building from it. The organization gets more cross training, and you get that payoff in terms of generosity. I'm looking day to day informally at what my colleagues need, but I'm also looking at how I can roll up sleeves and help them. So I think that's a big deal. The other thing that we've been hearing about best practices from companies is as they're focusing on well-being and mental health and community, they're creating affinity groups. And you'll remember affinity groups, a lot of that was driven by DEI, right? Like, we had affinity groups based on what made us unique together in our group. And some of the new affinity groups are very, very socially oriented and mental health oriented. Like, maybe it's a parents of young children affinity group because, oh my gosh, it's been stressful to have young kids and try to get my work done and care for my children. Or maybe it's people with people that they're doing caregiving for who are struggling with dementia, affinity group, right? So it has to do with figuring out what are those challenges that people are facing and then joining them together so they can find solutions together, find support together, find social nurturance together, and build that social fabric, which is part and parcel of communities. So I think those are some additional really good ideas that tend to be just more pragmatic, right? We're learning across the organization. We're supporting each other across the organization. We're giving and demonstrating generosity throughout the organization.
Yeah, I think you talked one time about, well, this was remote work, and thought it was interesting around like proximity bias and stuff like that. Like, so I'm going back to remote work, but we can touch on that later. But I think to go back to what you're saying around getting people connected in the workplace. Like, I think the one thing that we're facing now is like people with affinity groups too. Like, we're creating more of the same sometimes, like and it's all event driven. And I think one thing we're missing in the affinity groups is about peer-to-peer connection, because even when, and your instant, Tracy, of like maybe people with new children, well, people with new children are busy, and most of the time the affinity groups are how they connect is creating events. And if you can't make the event, right, like, it's how do you create more of that? Like, everything doesn't have to be about a moment in time of 3 hours. If you can make it or not, you're in or out. We have to think beyond of how we connect people, I think, too. Like, the evolution of what an affinity group could be, would it be about fostering more peer-to-peer connection between people that are never going to meet at an event? I mean, we were talking with MIT. This is just super interesting. We were talking with MIT when we were doing research for Like Minded, and they had a report that they had wearable technology on people that wanted to network for 3 years, like 3,000 people, and 96% have never met anybody new. So you like, there's so much, and think about like how lonely new parenting can be. Think about, And the other affinity group I never see a lot of in companies is new to the city. Like Galen, you talked earlier on about like why we're moving around. You know, how lonely is that? Like I come to a new city, I don't know anybody. We do this all the time, especially if we're trying to attract talent. And we move to a new city and we do nothing to integrate people into the community besides, hey, you should join this, or you should join this. It's like, how do we curate that process a little better and care more about people's, not just onboarding, but consistent integration? Because I'll tell you, you know, Milwaukee was started around this new to the city type of thing. And people, you know, you find an affinity around new, and I'm surprised how many companies don't have new to the city affinity groups. Like we have all these, you know, that they end up being segregated in a way around like race and things like that. But there's a way to cross-pollinate people that have that other kind of affinity.
I'm wondering, Jer, as you're building like-minded as a software platform around friendship, how do you see, you know, its relevancy as sort of like the potential to be the new ERG, employee resource group?
I think we don't, I'll let Tracy also talk about the remote thing because this has a lot to do with it. So I think, and you know what I'm talking about, Tracy, about like the proximity bias connection and like that study. It was really interesting to me. I think we form affinity groups that become another layer of work for people that don't get executed properly a lot. And it becomes a volunteer driven thing that needs to have a bigger priority in the community, or in the community of the companies. I mean, so I think we need to, it could be someone's full-time job. That could be a part of the community manager. Like it needs to be someone's full-time job to integrate people, to care about connection. So I think what this could do is connect people. What we think it could do and what it's already doing is we are connecting people that have never met in your organization that are finding happiness through a friendship. There's so much chance left to a programmatic layer of an event inside of a company. The chance that you can make it, the chance that you're not an introvert and you sit in the corner and don't talk to anybody because the extrovert's talking too loud and talking over you. The chance that you go there and you just actually talk to somebody new and you have, and like the Galen's point before, you're vulnerable and you have a real conversation and there's so much layers of chance. What I'm trying to do is science over serendipity. How do you take out the chance? And let's start really connecting people and having them find happiness inside companies. They're not going to, you know, you can only have so many friends, but you can definitely have relationships as you kind of scale out. And then, you know, obviously ARGs are going to be really tough if we're not in person, right? We're not connecting. And like, I love that story you told me one time about remote work. So can you just say that one really quick? I think it's really cool.
Are you talking about the study where people were collaborating across the company, across the nation, across
yeah. Like people, we think remote work, like people, it's like a bias that we, you know, like people, how do people connect if they're not in the same place?
Yeah, this is fascinating. This was PhD research that was done by a PhD researcher, not me, that was just brilliantly done. And she was asking people to collaborate across the company, across the nation, and across the globe. And then she was tracking follow-up, follow-through, and task completion. And she found perfect correlation between distance and follow-up, follow-through, and task completion. So when people were working with somebody across their company, their follow-up, follow-through, and task completion was best. When they were collaborating across the globe, it was worst. So it was absolutely correlated with distance. The trick in the study is that everybody was sitting in conference rooms right next to each other doing the work. And so it was all about perception of distance. It was the sociological truth that proximity is one of the #1 determinants of relationship, but this is perceived proximity, right? So how do we create greater perceived proximity? How do we create adjacencies that are both figurative and literal? And I think that has to do with connecting people across groups and connecting people either on platforms like Like-Minded or in affinity groups, and thinking, I love your point, Jeremy, like this can't be all event-based, right? Like if I got to get home and take care of my young child, I can't have lost any productive time at work. But if I've got to go get coffee anyway, how do I find people who also want to connect and we can grab coffee together for 2 minutes, even if we're walking from our desk back to the coffee pot together. So I think that point about integrating it into our time, into our work, rather than having it be a layered on effect is a really important point.
Yeah, and I think, for all the buddy group system things I've thing, or even mentorship programs, it's amazing to me how much we always take the person that's the most charismatic and the intro or the extrovert and say, this person's really charismatic. They would be the person that should mentor somebody. They would be the person that I'd match with a buddy because but that doesn't mean they're gonna, that's just an assumption that you're charismatic and outgoing, that you're gonna be compatible with everybody. Is like, so I mean, we make that as all the time. I see that consistently happen across platforms.
Yeah, Jeremy, your research about like what really attracts people to each other, I think is so consequential, right? Like, because there's a certain amount of an efficiency challenge, right? In terms of making friends. Like I gotta have lunch with you, I gotta have coffee with you, I gotta get to know you. Those are beautiful things, but chemistry in a relationship is also real. And so I love some of your research, Jeremy, about what really are those things that cause us to have those longer term relationships, that cause us to feel that deeper level of connection.
Yeah.
Someone added to the chat here, they want suggestions for team engagement activities. They have dedicated time each month, but they're looking for something new. I'm assuming that these might be remote, or are they in person? Maybe you have either of you have ideas for either context.
I think, I mean, one of the most uplifting experiences that we share is creation. If we work together on a shared goal, and even if it's a contrived goal, but we accomplish something, that it is really the value, the psychological value of work. I think I grew up in Amish country, and they used to watch and actually participated in barn raisings. And I mean, there was no better feeling than at the end of the day, you'd walk away and look at a barn that you built in a day. And it was a lot of work, but there was something tangible that you created together. And I think, we miss that. And I think we can, like I said, even if it's contrived, even if it doesn't relate specifically to our work, but to just have some time together to accomplish things. I mean, that's such an uplifting experience. And if we can apply that to our work community, it seems really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think about different kinds of activities that we want to do as engagement activities. And reflecting together, I totally agree with what Galen said as well, right? Task is such a meaningful way that we connect and build bonds together, even more than just quote unquote socializing. But in addition, if we are reflecting together, that is a powerful thing because we remember things differently and it allows us to cement. So what about that project went well or less well? So that's one. I think when we can create engagement activities that are about failing, right? Like what was one really hard thing that you learned, or what was one really, really tough thing that happened, right? It may have been in the project we just finished together, or it may be in the project that we're in the middle of together. I think another engagement activity that can be really strong is envisioning together. Like, what are your hopes, or what are your dreams, or what do you want to do next, or what do we want this team to be like, or what do we want this project to be like? That thirdly is kind of that looking forward. I think another thing that can be really powerful that I've heard a lot of teams using actually in stand-ups is like each month somebody has a responsibility to think of a metaphor. And the metaphor is something that you hope will help you think about obstacles and enablers. So a metaphor for the month might be things that are, wind in our sails, or waves at the front of our boat. What is that called? A stern. And so, like each weekly stand-up for the month, we're thinking about those obstacles and enablers in the mode of that metaphor. And then the next month, somebody else has to think about a metaphor that has to do with obstacles and enablers. And we think through that. So I think sometimes those engagement activities are less about the flavor of the punch or the location of our rock climbing activity, and they're more about like topically those different kinds of ways that we can relate together and different ways that we think together: reflection, envisioning, failure, obstacles and enablers. Those can be really powerful things that we can do both virtually and in person.
Yeah, a part of our annual, we do a strategic planning in December every year. And the thing I ask everyone at the beginning of the session is, what is the thing you're most proud of producing? What is the thing you're least proud of? And what will you never do again? And the what will you never, because you can be, you know what I mean? You'd be really proud of something and say like, and I'm never, you know what I mean? You could be proud that you like made it through that hideous thing and you hope you never do it again. So that last question can go either way, but I think it gets to the honest point about like, are there protocols, processes? Is it just the way that you want to work with another team member? Like that last question allows for a level of like radical candor that goes beyond the kind of like traditional SWOT analysis, right? Like it lets you be like a human being and think about like what it is that you produced together and how you might ensure that it's a better interaction moving forward.
Yeah, I think
I love that. And I think you were
what do you
making this
hate the
point
most?
earlier, Jeremy, as well, is kind of the point about trust, right? Like we build trust through giving more information about ourselves and learning more information about each other. And that ability to be vulnerable, right? Like, what was your most embarrassing moment? What's the thing you never want to do again? What's the thing you survived by the skin of your teeth? Those opportunities to be vulnerable. And sometimes the structure that allows that vulnerability gives us permission for the vulnerability versus being like, oh gosh, I don't want to do TMI here. I don't want to go too far. But if we've got an engagement activity that invites that can actually give some really great permission.
Yeah, I think, I always go back to why can a 5-person startup company topple a multi-million-dollar national corporation? It's because they don't spend time thinking about what kind of like axe throwing program I can do with my team, or things like that. It's about they don't, that's not real engagement. That's like forced fun type stuff, and I don't think it really works. I think what you're talking about, Tracy, is what is more needed. Like the reason startups can, fail, but also do really well is because you go through those emotions every 10 minutes that you just talked about. And you're talking about those teams that you're vulnerable to yourself, you're vulnerable to your team. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows your weaknesses. And because you're doing the form of engagement is building something together, but also you're constantly talking about what you did wrong and what you can improve and what the future is. It creates this level of community that is not forced. It's, authentic. And I think that's the most important thing is like, instead of what tactics can we do as far as like, where can we take the team on a, this kind of thing. And that's that type of approach too is the audience type of approach. The network, like as a leader is going to take you to go bowling, which can be fun. And I think there's room for those kind of things if people want to get together.
That's a great point.
The community approach and the connection approach is when the people on the team do it themselves and it comes organically and they meet each other and they're connecting. They say, hey, you know what? We should all go bowling together. It's not like a thing that we're doing top down. And that's where the real engagement happens, because the top down part is actually where it kind of falters and people So, I mean, it's remote's different, right? Like remote's, I don't need to ever go on another happy hour on a remote Zoom happy hour ever again. And anybody that does that, like, I just don't want to do that. I think it is hard. How do you build remote engagement? I mean, it's a lot of questions, and like we do sometimes at New, or we break out people, right? Like we break out people in rooms and ask really vulnerable questions to the team to get them to know each other, and learning about each other creates that connection.
Yeah.
Basically like a speed networking thing, but deeper questions than where you went to school, stuff like that.
That's a great point.
Well, we're coming up on our time here. I'm curious, does anybody have any final takeaways or thoughts they want folks to walk away with as we think about creating connection amid this moment of extreme isolation?
Want to kick it off, Galen?
I continue to think the foundation is self-awareness, that we have to understand our triggers, our motivations, and then we apply that to others. We use that awareness to be emotionally intelligent, emotionally available, in ways that are consistent with ourselves. And I mean, community is only possible when we're self-aware, we're reasonably healthy, and can engage from that point. So
yeah, and to that end, Galen, we do two things. The first is to have everyone take a self assessment, right? So while we're interviewing, actually, so we have a sense of who they are, they have a sense of who we are. And then in their first week with us, we actually have them build a user manual that goes through their style of working, their style of communicating, what are the weird quirks they have. And it's something they have to share with the whole group, so that we can, again, accelerate the intimacy and why someone might not want to have a meeting before 10 a.m., right? Like to just own that, they're not going to be present. They're not going to be able to engage because or that they have to be done by 2 o'clock to pick kids up for school. You know what I mean? That kind of, those are both really logistical things, but I think having that kind of direct conversation about who are you and how is it that you want to show up in this team? How do you want to use your time and talents? Having that be explicitly laid out. And like I said, in a manual that you share with everyone is a really tangible sort of way to approach that.
I love it. Yeah.
That's really cool. I love that idea. And the other thing that I really like is the idea of we have a responsibility and an obligation to each other. And that is a good thing. Like as humans, it is a good thing to have that responsibility and obligation. So at the same time that I do a user manual, maybe there's a page that says, here's what I'm going to do to learn about other people. It's not just about you meeting my needs, right? You knowing all about me so that you can come my way. It's that, and it's me really recognizing and embracing the responsibility I have to you. And I think in terms of just final thought for me is we have such an opportunity to reset. Like this has been such a tough moment, in this complete disruption, this pull the rug out from under all of us has given us a new moment to think about what's really important to us. What do we really want to spend time on? And I think this question of why do I work? What do I want to do? And who do I want to work with are really big deal questions. And that who do I want to work with? How do I create relationships? Maybe this disruption opens the door for us to think about how we create relationships in a more intentional way, how we choose who we get to work with in an intentional way. Those are some pretty great opportunities. And maybe we remove the social stigma to some extent of mental health challenges or isolation, so we can kind of cross that void, cross that threshold, and come together in some new and intentional ways.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that. And I think that's one of the reasons, Tracy, we're seeing what they're calling like the Great Resignation. I think enough people have had a moment to slow down, pause, and to really look at where they are at and decide that they would like something different. I definitely think those things are correlated. Jer, before you give any final thoughts, Alyssa just popped into the chat. How can we go about creating connection when it is not an event and it is more integrated in our lives? Any thoughts on that?
I got a software for that. Yeah, I mean, it starts with what Galen said, like understanding ourselves and understanding others. And that's, fairly easy to kind of to do in the workplace. And then it starts with making a priority. I think when you think about culture, when you ask somebody, what's the culture of your workplace? What kind of responses do you usually get? It's all over the board. It really isn't a culture. It's like, I've heard work hard, play hard. Like, that's not what does that really mean, right? Or, this is when every single employer says they're a great place to live, work, and play. Well, does that mean the other ones are not as good? So what is culture? Culture starts by people connecting over some kind of experience or work or in the workplace. And as they get deeply connected, they both have an intrinsic value to create something. And the more people in the company connecting and creating something starts to create culture, and that creates bottom-up culture. And then there's obviously top-down culture, which is created by policy and politics and things in the corporation, and
Vision
a
setting.
lot of times mandated fun and stuff like that, and expectations. And so how can you create more bottom-up culture is the way we're doing it right now, and all the companies we're working with is basically matching people to start building community one-to-one, peer-to-peer, having them meet this month, and every 30 days you're going to meet with someone new across sector in the company and connect with them. And then you take it from there, right? Like you don't have to meet this person every day, but we're basically saying that people have to meet more people than just who they work with there. And I think that's where the future of this goes, is just connecting people and letting them do the best communities start because people are passionate about creating something in the company. Like ERGs didn't form because someone said, let's build a bunch of ERGs. Someone wanted to create something in the company, and they went and they got approval for it, right? So we need more of that to happen. So how do you create that? You can keep fostering more connections, and people will finally start to create stuff, and that's the community.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Is there anybody else that wants to unmute or ask a question of our panelists?
I just got a question for Galen. Tell us
Okay.
about the early days of eHarmony matching. Some of those first dates.
Oh my, it was a long process. We spent 3 years doing research and developed a monster questionnaire. It was, we started down, it was 400 items. People took it though. That the barrier to entry, I think, was actually a good thing because a lot of dating sites at that point were not, women felt terribly uncomfortable, and a lot of them, pictures were not filtered. And so the fact that you had to take this long questionnaire, I think was a good barrier to entry. But yeah, once we got up and running, it was another 3 years till voila, we were an overnight success. So, but yeah, there were a lot of lot of learnings early on. We really, I was approaching it as a social scientist entirely. And, we weren't even going to allow people to post pictures until they met. And it's like, there is a market demand that has to be accommodated before the science can be of value. So, but
yeah. Kristen wants to know, with peer-to-peer connections, do you provide them with tasks to do or just instruct them to meet? Any thoughts on, whether or not you need a lot of facilitation?
Yeah, I mean, you can do, so what we give people is their feathers. So like Galen said, there's an assessment on the front end, right? So we get to understand them, and then we match them based on the science behind it, but also that we give them their feathers. So birds of feather flock together type of things. We have growth too, but we basically give them their icebreakers before they meet. And what we found was that when people got the feathers, they talked 35 minutes longer than when they didn't. We didn't give them anything, we just didn't meet. So that was some of the early research. We're like, well, why don't we just give these people their highest intensity of interests and commonalities together so they could spark a conversation right away. And that seems to be working. Yeah, there could be prompts too of what they do, but so based on their interests, well, if you're both, I see so many membership organizations that we work with that have wine nights when 30% of the organization drinks wine, but then you find like 75% of the organization loves hiking. And it's like, why don't we just do hikes? Because what happens in when you build organizations like this is it's always the most outspoken, loud person whose opinion gets to the top of what program they do. And now we have a better way to do that, right? We have a better way using like-minded to say, this person really wants to do a running event, but none of the membership actually likes to run. So why are we keep doing this? And then you hear people say, well, no one shows up to our happy hour events. No one shows up to this. It's because you're not hitting the right target. So that's what we're really focusing on is but we're also focused on let the person decide how they want to connect, and not say that you have to meet in conference room A every two. It's a little different with remote working, but people are obviously meeting on Zoom. But just give them enough to get it started, and people are human. They'll take it.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all so much for participating in this conversation. Thank you to our audience members for joining us over this noontime hour. Fascinating conversation here today. And I think there's much more we have to do. This is not something that we can just sort of talk about and put on a shelf. It's going to require a vigilance, whether we're working within an organization or a company, to create these real spaces for engagement and belonging to exist amongst the people we're trying to gather. So I appreciate all of your expertise and your contributions. Thank you everyone for joining. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.